What's good, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of Conversation Piece, your place to discover the untold stories of Indianapolis through the perspectives of its spectacular people. My name is Patrick Armstrong. I am your host, and I have not been in the saddle for quite a while, but I'm excited to be back in 2025, the year of community. Before we jump into this conversation, just want to shout out everybody that's been popping up and checking out all the new stuff that we've had going on, not only events, but some of the new podcasts and shows and conversations that we've been doing out in the city and then just in other places. So appreciate y'all for tuning in. Everything else, Conversation Piece, go to conversationpiecepod.com. Cool stuff happening there as well. And the cool stuff that's happening is this conversation right now.
Yes.
My guest today is consistently creating meaningful and lasting impact in Indianapolis, whether it was organizational impact as a leader at IFF, community impact as a leader at Indy Pride, or right now as the CEO of Forty5, a locally owned boutique production company dedicated to creating unforgettable live music experiences in the city's most beautiful and unique spaces. I think we have a lot that we're going to touch on today, and I am really excited to be having this conversation. So I will tarry no further. It is my great joy and privilege to welcome Jenny Boyts to the show. Jenny, thanks for joining me.
Thanks. That was a hell of an intro.
Appreciate
being
that.
here. Glad to be here.
I appreciate you sticking with me as it took me a little bit to get there, but we got there and we're here now.
We're here.
And
Here we are.
And we're going to have a great conversation.
We are.
I like to lead with tough questions.
Yep.
So I'm going to start here. You played 2 years of softball, IU Indy.
Yeah.
During that time, you hit one home run. I was wondering if you remembered that moment and if you could walk us through the feeling that you had hitting that home run.
That's a wild first question. You're like the second person in the last 3 weeks that has reminded me very specifically of my mediocre, mid-major Division I softball career.
You hit a home run.
Yeah, one. I had one.
That's okay.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't hit any.
I don't remember it.
Okay.
I wasn't I wasn't in cleanup back then,
Sure.
but I was, hopefully consistent enough that, made some meaningful impact. But
For
my
sure.
God, that's a throwback.
Hey.
It was 2 years of, quite frankly, I'm sure we'll make it into this in some ways, but I went from a huge city that I grew up in, went to a teeny tiny little junior college, and then wanted to come and always wanted to play Division I softball. So I got to do that and
Sure.
made great relationships and basically fell in love with Indy, which is, the only reason that brought me here was softball. So in that way, it's, I'm grateful, but yeah, these knees aren't remembering it fondly in that way.
For sure. As a former athlete, I'm still trying to be an athletic person. My knees are also constantly reminding me of the pain that I've put them through. So I understand that and resonate. Do you remember your first impressions of Indy once you got here? Because you were coming as an athlete, which I think a lot of people do, but Indy has a pool. Do you remember those first kind of impressions?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I probably, like a lot of folks, showed up. I actually came with a couple roommates from junior college who were from Northern Indiana. And so, it kind of worked out that we were together. So at least had a couple friends, which really I do think makes a difference in the city.
For sure.
There's always something happening, always, you guys got to figure it out. You got to dig around. And sometimes, especially in formative years or busy years, if you're a college athlete, where and how do I have time to figure out what's the cool shit happening in the city? So it was nice to have some friends. We lived in Speedway when we moved here.
Okay.
I didn't live on campus. And so that was an interesting experience. I literally lived, where you could hear the cars, and I was like, what? Called my dad and being like, I don't know how close they are, but they feel very close. And so anyway, that was an interesting intro to just kind of what's the kind of diversity of the city. And quite frankly, I think was really helpful in the first couple of years because it was intro kind of outside and then kind of moving to the core. But yeah, I mean, Indy did what Indy does, which is you just, you figure out who kind of are your people, especially when you're in college.
Yeah.
For me, this formative group of friends that are still in my community to this day. But I also, learned pretty early on that this is a city you got to kind of search a little bit for, but there's always cool shit happening. And once you do that, you're going to stick around and you're going to call it home. Look up one day and it's home, which is what it is for me. Yeah,
for sure.
That's great.
Was there a particular thing that you came across or you found or you discovered that was that was like made you realize, this is a place I could stay?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think it's almost a full circle moment. I haven't thought about this, so let me see if this tracks. I lived here those few years, I think was the Final Four, one of the first men's Final Four. Maybe not first, let me like fact check me here, but at least my first Final Four in the city or in any city, quite frankly, where I could actually partake. And the Super Bowl wasn't like too far after that, right? So I remember being here and being like, wow, this is a sports city. I mean, this feels like a sports city, right? And I think what feels full circle about that, and maybe even, if I really were to sit with this, which I haven't for a long time, is kind of feeling like, wow, here's what makes a city, right? Is like, how are you like convening people, whether it's around a sporting event or for us, like, live music or whatever that looks like, that there's an everlasting, meaningful impact of both the connection that can be made, but also the ways you see and experience the city.
Yeah.
Right. Because like never, when I was living in Speedway and like, doing 2-a-days and having to go to like, study hours and all this other shit that college athletes have to do, never was I like, oh, let me go watch, this huge Final Four game on the Circle or go to this party. Like it just would have been harder or like unattainable in some way. And Indy made it easy. It made it fun. It made it safe. And so actually now that if I were to really sit with that, I think that actually is a really interesting like reflection of my memory was because of sports. Like my experience that was meaningful was sports. And I think that's full circle. I mean, we do so much at 45 with Sports Corp and so many other, the Pacers team, sports entertainment that there is this really nice pairing actually of what I'm doing now that is still convening people in meaningful ways, but also is pairing with what the city is known for, which is a bit of a sports city too. So yeah, that would be probably some of the most meaningful memories that I would have then.
For sure. Yeah. I appreciate that. Do you think that is like, was that the drive to do the specific like philanthropic work that you did to start off with? It's like, okay, this is what I think the city is and what it offers, and I want to tap into that in my professional career. No, not at all. In fact, I actually probably thought it was unattainable back then. So I knew when I graduated high school, my undergrad's in social work actually. So when I graduated high school, I was like, I'm going to be a social worker. I want to do that. I actually finished my undergrad and went to work straight for Krista Morehouse on the west side in Hawville. Okay. Yeah.
Loved it. One of the best jobs of my life, of my career. Felt so rooted in community, felt so rooted in what was like the heartbeat of the city, which are people in these kind of pockets and neighborhoods that have been here for such a long time. I mean, Hawville has such this beautiful, rich history, right? It was cool to be there. I think that was clean and clear from the beginning. Like I wanted to work with people, relationships mattered to me. Like how am I helping in the ways that, with all of my privilege as a white femme, like that I could and should in a city that I was going to stick around in. I think it moves and kind of continues to move whenever you start, my career anyway, starts to think about that theme of like, what does it mean and look like to gather people formally or informally or for joy and entertainment or for necessity, which was a lot of what we were doing at Indy Pride. And so, I think the through line is less of the like philanthropy from the very beginning and more of the through line of like community makes a city, people make community, and how am I just staying connected and kind of convening and gathering folks in ways that not only they want to, but as, selfishly, I get to have a little fun in that too and just make really good friends and meet really good people. So
for sure. Does that love of community come from like your time playing sports as an athlete? Is that like something you got at home? Like growing up in Texas, how far does community take root for you? Yeah, I mean, it's so innate to who I am. I think I could probably draw a couple through lines to that too. One of which I think is my dad was a basketball player, so he played basketball at TCU, which is how we ended up in Fort Worth, Texas. Gotcha. But my family is, they're Mennonite. So we came through Lancaster, Pennsylvania, northern Indiana, came down, and there's just such that rich kind of communal, culture that's within the Mennonite faith. And so that was really interesting. If I really, as I was growing older, kind of paying attention a little closer to like, where do I come from? What does this look like? I mean, the continuum that is, Anabaptist theology, if we're really going to get there, our kind of family was on this pretty liberal social justice minded side of that. And that just actually made things click as to like why me and kind of my family and so many of my friends were kind of living and feeling comfortable in those spaces. But I actually think, yes, team sports, 100%. Yeah. What team sports allowed for me too is like,
I got to meet so many different kinds of people, right?
Sure.
You know, high school, middle school is so hard. I played baseball with the boys until they told me I couldn't anymore. Like,
Okay.
you know, they were like, you're too old now. You got to go play the like big ball. You got an underhand. I was like, but what do you mean you have to wear shorts? So I got like that, like, how do you fit in there? How do you
Sure.
like prove yourself? How do you work hard? Even if it's problematic, which, you know, some of that is. And then how do you kind of move into a space then where I was a catcher, so tried to be a bit of a leader on the field. And yeah, I mean, in high school, it didn't confine me to a clique or a group of people. I had friends from every corner of, you know, of the school. So that was really formative for me. And I think actually was something that I was like, I don't want to get kind of confined or put in a box or stay in a bubble. Yeah. And I think that's true all the way up to now, right? Like I try to kind of keep and have what I feel a really lucky network of really close and core people, but also, you know, so many good friends in the city that have just built my community as it is now. So yeah, I think there's certainly some like roots, especially from like childhood, but the more you kind of like self-actualize, the more you're like, oh, this is what brings me joy.
For sure.
And you know, somebody asked me last week, like, what do you do for self-care? And my honest answer is like, communal care is self-care for me. Like
I totally
get
agree.
Energy from being in with people. I get energy from, you know, not everybody, but from big events where people are experiencing new things, seeing new things, hearing new things, bringing their family, people of all ages. Like that's energizing to me. And so I think that's the thing I've been chasing and like want to continue building. Yeah.
Well, when your work is, how can I make this experience the most impactful and meaningful for a wide range of people, as wide a range of people as possible? You can't help but like tap into that lived experience. And so the root is important because it's not everything, but it's the foundational building block that we can step up from. And it's like, this is what makes me me, so I can be the most whole version of me and then be the best member of my community. Because I can't be the best member of my community. I can't contribute the way that I'm meant to contribute if I don't fully like understand or I'm navigating the journey of myself.
Well, that's true. And I also think what's true is, and some of us to different degrees and depths, but like humans just, you know, we're not meant to be in isolation.
For sure.
And I think especially now, and especially in even the last like decade, it's just been easier and easier and easier to kind of like find who are your people, what does that look like? And or I just go, you know, I gotta like, you know, go into myself and internalize because it's like shit's hard, right?
100%.
For some folks, it's even harder. And so I think that's the other piece, right? Is there's this concerted and almost double down effort of being like, if you don't want to be alone, if you don't want to be, you know, doing what you need to be doing for yourself, like, then there's lots of options. And my hope is that joyful experiences for people to kind of connect with each other. Because again, we do lots of shows. My best nights are like walking in and there's people who come to shows by themselves. And I'm like, hell yeah, this is what it means to like not only create the space, but also like for people to feel safe enough to be able to kind of come and experience, whether you talk to anybody or not, you weren't alone. And you experience, hopefully, you know, an artist that you love, or we often say kind of like, you know, we drive for like the best night of your life. Right. And so like, what does that mean and look like for even the one person who shows up to the show by themselves? And I think that speaks to what we're saying, which is that like people want community, they want to contribute if they want to, but they may just want to like participate. And that is what I hope we're doing.
For sure. Like if you don't have the opportunity, then you don't even get the chance to. And so just by simply providing this opportunity, you know, give people the chance to be not only feel safe in the space, but then maybe be brave enough then the next time to meet somebody and connect with somebody and build that community out.
Yeah, that's real.
You talked about how you have like your people within this wider community. One of the things that I talk about a lot is that for me, I didn't really like feel like I hit my stride until I found my community within my community. Because I think when I first started to like unpack my identity as an Asian person, as an adopted person, I thought I had to be friends with everybody. And it felt really good to know that there were a lot of people that shared a lived experience. But then like you get into a community and it's like, well, maybe not everybody's aligned in the same way. And it was really nice to be able to like find those people. But I think it's really challenging for somebody who's stepping into community for the first time. How did you like navigate finding your people within like a wider community? Yeah,
that's a good question. And one I think I like think about often. I mean, it somewhat goes back to what we were just talking about, which, you know, at least for me, I've tried to kind of like process the ways in which what might have even been like a trauma response growing up actually is my strength now. Like is one of my greatest strengths now. Like how am I actually not shedding that experience, but saying, here's what it taught me and what am I doing with it? And one of those is this like convening and kind of community builder kind of identity that I've created for myself, right? And because part of that is for me, I grew up in North Texas. My parents helped start one of the largest evangelical Baptist churches in North Texas.
Okay.
And I knew I was gay when I was 6. And so I like kind of immediately felt like, okay, we were so enmeshed in the church, right?
Yeah.
Like we were just so enmeshed that I knew that wasn't quite the safe space. Like pretty early, I knew that wasn't it. I mean, maybe even when I was 6 because of that. So there was this kind of idea of like, how do you navigate spaces and people and relationships carefully? And I wonder if this resonates with you, but like, how does my identity change the way I move about the world? And I learned that and saw that really early for me. And I think it was really hard, right? Middle school was fucking hard. Like
middle school kids, my mom was an 8th grade English teacher. They mean. They are not very nice sometimes.
They're still kind of mean, but they, I mean, that was hard. But when you have this kind of self-actualize, like if you have and know yourself enough, or whether it's because it's your outward identity, or for me, there was a world where I could probably pass back then. That you just kind of try to figure out how do you navigate that. For me, what that's done is then allowed me to kind of say, let's take a step back. Let me assess the situation. Who are the right relationships? Where is their trust? Where is there not? Where is this a necessity? But I don't know if I'm going to like really share much of myself.
Sure.
How do I build community within that? And then also to your point, like who are the people that I deeply trust? Like, and you figure that out pretty quick when you had to do that as a kid. At least for me, I had to kind of say like, this is a yes or a no, or like, there weren't many maybes whenever you're 12, 13, and, you're queer and living in this kind of setting. So I say all that to say that I think what happened was then when I was able to kind of fully live into that and step into that and move into that identity for myself, then it was easy to kind of like see, okay, who are the people, who are my kind of people? And for me, it was kind of the queer community.
For sure.
And I think, I think that's still true to this day. I think that was really liberating in a lot of ways, like not just because you could totally be yourself and everybody around you could as well. But again, you were kind of shedding that like, oh, I could breathe now. I don't have to be always on, like always looking around the corner.
You don't have to perform all the time.
Who are my threats? Who are what are my risks? Like when you can walk into a room and don't have any of that, like there's real peace, at least for me, and feels like safety. And so, I mean, I don't know that that's necessarily what I'm trying to deconstruct with so much of what I'm doing in community, but I certainly hope that people are feeling like, you can walk into a room and not necessarily be judged or have to kind of perform in a certain way. And maybe you find your people and maybe you just had a good experience on your own. But the hope would be, that what I've learned and that people want to be in community. They do, right? And again, going back to like people don't want to be in isolation. Like if you don't have options, to your earlier point, like, who's to say how long that will take, if ever, that you really feel safe and comfortable in who we are? Because let's be clear, like none of us are a monolith. Like even within each of these different sects of identity, that's just not real. So
100%.
Yeah. How are we getting curious about each other in safe spaces feels really important to me.
I really appreciate you sharing all that. I think like you don't have to be in deconstruction mode right now because it seems like you've done a lot of that work. Yeah. You've had the opportunity to, whether or not you maybe wanted to at the time,
that's
like
real.
you have, it seems like, at least from my perspective.
Yeah.
Like I really appreciate you sharing because a lot of what you said really resonates with me, even if it's maybe in an opposite direction. Because like when I was growing up, I grew up as a transracial adoptee. So I was adopted from Korea. My parents were white. I grew up in rural Indiana. And while I had like a positive experience, like I had parents that loved me, I also grew up in like a colorblind, pretty racist community.
Yes.
And like I internalized those things. And because what I was witnessing from other people, my family included, that made me feel like my outward identity, my Asian identity was a bad thing. So I rejected that.
There was shame there.
And I would do that until I was 30.
Yeah.
So like I didn't, so I was really like interested in your early awareness and realizing, I have to navigate a little differently and like being intentional about it. Because I was like, I think I had that realization, but my intentionality was to try to shed a significant part of myself, like a literal foundation. Like, and you can't rip my face off. There is
no choice. That's exactly right. That's right. Yeah. And I think the thing that is real, and I wonder if this resonates for you, is that is sometimes can be really violent. Like, and 100%. I mean that like. I mean that literally, and that it sometimes feels like when you're moving back and forth and in and out of spaces. And let me be clear, like for me, I knew it, but I wasn't saying it out loud when I was sick. So, I could pass, right? 100%. So I could move freely in and out.
Well,
that's almost
more difficult. That could be a different difficulty.
It's maybe different.
Because that's a hidden identity, like a neurodivergence or something like that. It's like hidden from people. Yeah. And because of the way we stigmatize things, those hidden identities, we make people not talk about.
Yeah. Well, especially when you grew up in a place where it's like, you are going to go to hell. Like, here's these different resources and options you could go to. I mean, like, that's coming from not just like, now what was the noise of social media, which thank God that didn't exist. That's coming from people in my family, right? Like, so there's like, I think that's true. I do think like that kind of back and forth and code switching in some ways, but also just moving from, what's the kind of mainstream, kind of in my world, secular kind of core culture and back and forth it's exhausting. And especially when you're young and especially when you can't hide it. So I just affirm and want to acknowledge like that's real for you too. Like, do you remember like you being really early and like when it flipped of like, oh, I'm in a mostly white racist small town in Indiana? Do you remember that?
So I think one of the memories, like core memories that I have is that my parents took me to a what I believe was a Korean cultural convention. Okay. I thought it was in Indy, but when I've tried to research it, I think it was in Lafayette. Anyways, we went here and I don't remember.
It was the big city.
Yeah, it was the big city for sure. Yeah. But we went to the event and I don't remember what we did, but I remember how I felt afterwards and I felt like shame and disgust. Like I was just really uncomfortable in my own skin. And my parents, I think, saw this reaction of me. And because the rhetoric around transracial adoption is assimilation in the 90s at that point, it still was, to them, it was like, okay, well, we tried and he clearly doesn't like it. So because we love our kid, we're not going to put them in that position. Yeah. And I didn't realize it then, but like looking back on it now, I realize like that was a moment where I think that I'm conscious of it now because I think consciously then I was like, I got to put this away. Yeah. And like there are other moments. I was just talking to a friend about this. When I think about my past life since I've started my identity journey 5 years ago, I've struggled to remember some like anything but some of the traumatic times, which sucks. Yeah. I'm the same way. When I reflect. Yeah. However, like you were talking about, it's not that I have to shed those things. Yeah. It's that I've needed to really come to terms and understand them. Yeah. Because it's not like I'm trying to let it go so much as like I'm trying to understand the full totality of my life. Yeah. Yeah. And then what that means not only for me as an individual, but as a member of multiple communities. Yep. Not only my local community, but my ethnic community, my racial community, any other identities I might hold. Yeah. Yeah. So like multiple like touch points on the way to having to start unpacking that at 30. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what's true, and I think of this often, and you said it a couple of times of like shedding pieces of yourself. Yeah. Like the thing I think about is I often don't, at least I'm trying and working really hard to like not shed again, like kind of these, like what were these things that I think some people would be like, there's a fear of being alone. And I'm like, well, hell yes, there is. Yeah. But none of us really want to be alone. For sure. And also like, why is that such a bad thing? Like if there's a healthy like level and a healthy relationship with kind of dependency or attachment, then in my brain, like let's build on that. And so some of what I've been thinking is even a bit of a reframe around, and I don't know if this resonates, of like, instead of shedding those parts of yourself, of course, as our identity and core identity, you can't. Yeah. But instead, like, what does it mean to just come closer to who we actually are? Yeah. And sometimes that's painful, right? Because it's like memories that you're like, what? Why did I do that? Why was I in that space? Why was I talking to that person? How did this become so ugly? And what does it say about me? But also it's like, like getting curious even about yourself and what are those strengths and how am I actually being kind to myself in that journey as opposed to being like, there's the shame and kind of, level of disappearance that people want to do this anyway. They don't do that anyway. Yeah. There's enough people out there to do that. Like, don't do it to ourselves, I guess is what I think too. 100%. Well, I want to embrace those pieces. That's where I'm at now. Shout out to therapy. Shout out to my therapist for helping me get to this point. That's through therapy. Yes. Absolutely. Well, that's because it took me again 3 years of starting to do identity work to even get to a place where I felt safe enough to start therapy. Yeah. And it was because I got to a point in my journey where I was like, oh, okay, I think I'm good. Yeah. Like I feel really good. Yeah. I think I've got a grip on this. Yeah. And then I went back to Korea for the second time.
Okay.
Had an experience, came back, and I was like, I'm fucked up. I need to go to therapy immediately.
Shit's actually not right.
Yeah, and because it was like, I felt like I had ascended the mountain and I was standing at the peak. But what happened was I turned around. Like Korea was me turning around and saying, oh, there is more mountain to climb. And so
much more.
Yeah, and it was like, I need now new tools and resources to be able to do that. And because there's clearly more here that for whatever reason, I thought over 3 years wasn't like 3 years was enough time to unpack 30 years. Of rejection.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah. And they're never going to be enough time because it's a perpetual journey.
Oh yeah. I mean, I hope that everybody feels that like there's never a like end to this.
For sure.
I mean, at least I don't believe that to be true. And this idea that like, oh, we've come to some sort of like enlightenment about ourselves, you're just going to be disappointed. And quite frankly, you're going to disappoint people around you.
Sure.
Because they're going to think like you have to be this one thing all the time. And that's just not real. Like people change all the time. And what does that look like? And especially as you're learning a lot about yourself or coming closer to who you are and what that looks like it's going to come with some moments and maybe some ugliness too, that it's just like kindness to ourselves that I think really matters. So I have 10 million more questions, but I know this is
for sure. No, it's all good. This
is we'll have coffee afterwards.
We're having this podcast is about conversations, and I love this conversation that we're having right now. I mean, if you have a question that you want to ask,
can I ask a question?
For sure, go for it.
I guess I'm curious about like, so we went to Korea. I'm wondering like your relationship with your family or kids you grew up with then, like what was that, not only your kind of awareness of I got to go and go learn more in this way, but also I want to be able to talk about it. Maybe you didn't talk about it, or like, what was that like?
So
struggle,
I'm going to plug
excitement.
So I'm doing a podcast now. We're on a podcast right now.
Sure.
So I fell into podcasting at the beginning of my identity journey.
Yes. Okay.
In September of 2020, myself and two other Korean adoptees, we launched a show called The John Chi Show.
Yes.
Where we talk about the Korean adoptee experience and now more broadly the Asian adoptee experience. And we did that on a weekly basis for 4 years. And so we're still doing it.
Yes.
Not on a weekly basis. My bad, guys.
We're getting back to it. We're being kind to ourselves. It's fine.
But that allowed me to do, so leading into that second trip to Korea, that's why I thought I was good, because I was doing a sprint. I was doing a sprint of like college level, like psychology analysis of
you were in the
myself
master's program.
over like, and trying to understand my lived experience in a very short period of time.
And like, did you just say September 2020?
Yes.
So like the world was falling apart.
100%.
We were like washing groceries and shit then, right? Okay,
So lots of stuff happening at this time. And so to answer your question, my mom has been a big supporter. And even though we were politically split at that time, she was always been supportive, and she was listening to the show and was hearing this. But it really wasn't until the Atlanta spa shootings in 2021 that kind of triggered this, like, there's not enough conversation, and also a realization for me that everything I've been talking about was falling on, was being unheard, because my white friends and my white family were not seeing me as Asian while we were watching a bunch of Asian people be attacked because that's what they look like.
Yes.
And so I recorded an episode, I believe it's episode 33, where it basically just went on an hour-long rant. So I was really hurt emotionally, and I was like a bunch of people reacting to the situation. And like a week later, my mom messaged me at work, and she said she apologized for raising us in a colorblind household, because I have a younger sister, also adopted, not biologically related to me. And then she also said that she knew now that she would never know what it was like to not be white. And so like that started, I don't think a revolution in our relationship is hyperbole. Like it changed the way that we could interact, because she was taking accountability for the first time. And I, as part of my unpacking this identity and unpacking the context around who I am as a person, was able to like hold the space for us to continue a relationship. Because I know a lot of people who have had falling outs with their adoptive parents because they're not able, the adoptee, but the adoptive parent is not able to make that space for them as they explore this key piece of them. Because because for adoption and the adoption narrative, the centered identity and voice has always been the adoptive parent. And so especially in 2020, and now I'm just on my soapbox, like I'm here for this. That's where we're seeing a groundswell of voices from our community start to center themselves. And so like, that's how I got to to be doing this. And so like those conversations, like I wouldn't say I've lost friends, but I would say that we don't have a connection anymore because we're just in different spaces now.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like I grew up seeking and needing attachment to a really unhealthy degree. And that carried with me through adulthood until I got to this point where I could start not shedding, but embracing my wholeness, which meant that I might have to lose and let go of some other things that did not serve me.
Yeah. And I imagine it was really challenging, partly because like what we know about whiteness is that there's also this like need and desire to be like to fix shit, right?
Sure.
And also maybe be a savior. And especially if you're an adopted parent,
100%.
I imagine for your mom, that was powerful to be like, I always thought, and to you sounds like doing the work of loving you well, keeping you safe.
For
like,
sure.
What did that experience look like for you? But at least you're here now and like, I got you, whatever. Like that is still like good parenting maybe in her eyes. Especially for us as white folks, it's like, but where is the like acknowledgement that actually that's maybe not also healthy to kind of be like, well, let me protect you in some way. Like, and I don't have children, but you know, I talk about this a lot with like my nieces and nephews galore. And this idea that like the need to protect them stops them from learning and experiencing things about themselves. What's the boundary of this like slide you're about to like jump down head first?
Right.
Right. That's maybe an extreme example.
My son is my 16-month-old son literally jumping head first down slides.
But like, you know, where do you say like, no, don't even go on the slide?
For sure.
And you do that out of love to be like, it's safety and love. And sometimes, especially for white folks, it's our whiteness that says like, but I have to protect you because you don't even know what's good for you. When really it's like, go figure out what's good for you. And it sounds like you like found that through conversation and connection with people.
Took a long ass time, but we got there.
Yeah.
And like, I think back to that first example of like going to the convention, me feeling a type of way and expressing it. And then their reaction being, okay, well, we're not going to do
because we don't want you to be in pain.
Yeah. So it's like done out of love. But again, a lot of people that I'm connected to, like conversation we have is about impact and intent. And like, we have to understand those two things. And I can see the good intention behind it, but we can't dismiss the impact that it had on my life.
Do you think you would have had a different reaction, or like, how do you think things would have changed? Like, was there a desire for them to actually just be like, how was that for you? Like ask and get curious emotionally about it? Or were you kind of like...
So at that time, definitely not. So my dad and I have had conversations about like males expressing emotions. And like he's talked about how that was not a thing that he did. It's like really difficult for us still to do that. But for him to even admit something like that, I thought was really powerful. But at that time, no, like there was no
you were like, I want to talk about it.
Because it's easier for them to just be like, okay, we'll move on to the next thing. But it's a more difficult thing to sit and breathe and have the conversation. And I think for them as parents, especially in the 90s, like you're still in this mindset of like, well, like you just get over it, you know? And so like, that's why I dealt with from from like a microaggression standpoint was just like a lot of times from my parents and from other people, like guardians, especially it was, well, you're either taking that the wrong way or you're too emotional or you just need to get over it. And
they didn't really mean that thing. They didn't mean that. You misread that. You misinterpreted that.
I don't know any better because there are no other Asian people around me who can be like, well, no, that was bad. There aren't even other black people or any person that's not white.
It's not white.
To be able to share, well, maybe that's not, you know, the right thing.
Yeah, it's resonating. And it makes me think, I think my question was also coming from like the space of when people get curious and allow the emotional space about like what's actually like, there's a difference between like, you know, I think about this often, shout out therapy. Therapy. You know, in arguments or in conflict, personally, professionally, like the need to understand is more important than the need to be right.
Sure.
And so like, if I'm just always seeking to understand and asking questions from curiosity, then it gives you the room and space to be like,
for sure,
actually, I don't want to talk about it right now. Or that was bullshit because this and this happened. And I don't like when I have to go to this group or this play group because this like gives you the space. For me, like really quickly, I think for me, what's really true about what you're saying is, without going too deep into it, my relationship with my parents has been really tricky too.
Sure.
And I did a Creative Mornings 2 years or so ago. Somehow my dad found the link and, you know, we had a bit of a like hiatus for a while. We actually didn't have a relationship. We had a kind of a come to Jesus conversation where I was like, I want to be in a relationship with you, but here's what this looks like. And then the Creative Mornings came out, which, didn't think, and you're starting to tell your story and you're having the space and you're talking on your podcast. And you're like, this was my experience. And my dad, either he called me or he texted me or something and was like, I saw that, like, asked a question about something that I had said about my childhood that he had never done before. And in my head, I was like, this is great now, but imagine if that curiosity was for everybody, or you're emotionally available, in this formative years, or when this specific instance happened that you're asking about that you just didn't know, or you didn't know it hit me like that.
Yes.
And I think that opens a new world, a new space for something new in a relationship.
For sure.
And for me, at least, it sounds like there's alignment with parents. Is 100%. Like my parents now, there's room for a new and different kind of relationship that's not going to be a parent-child relationship, but it is going to be like one that I'm unapologetic. Yeah. And if you're curious, ask questions. And if you ask questions, I'm going to be more free and willing and feel safe to answer them and talk through it. So that sounds like there's some like synergy in that too. And really it changed, and it sounds like it did for you too, whenever there was like, okay, there's some curiosity. A, I could tell the story. I'm confident enough to do that. And B, like there's some curiosity from there in too, that this is a reciprocal relationship. This isn't, I don't need you to care for me anymore. I need you to get curious about me as an adult and who I am.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think a thing that we talk about in the adoptee community a lot is like the infantilization that happens. Yeah. So you adopt, when you think about adoption, the dominant narrative is you adopt a child, and that's the end. And that's the end of that person's story. Is like you were adopted, you're a baby, and you don't ever grow up. Yeah. And I think parents struggle with that because there's a savior aspect at play. Yeah. There are lots of like really good intentions, but we're not thinking about the negative impacts that could come,
culturally,
from a situation like that. And it made me think about like something Ryan Hunley just posted about. He was shout out to Pattern, was just a digital cover.
Yeah, we love Ryan.
But he talked about how he was breaking or had broken this intergenerational cycle of trauma. Mm-hmm. And I was moved by that because I'm like, I'm wondering if I've not been curious enough about my parents' situation, but now as a parent, I know that I'm trying to like use my lived experience to be better. And then to quote, so spoilers for The Last of Us season 2, but they've added additional stuff from the game. But there's a flashback with Joel's dad, and his dad is telling him, he's like, if you ever have the chance to have kids and you're lucky enough, he's like, I hope you do a little bit better than me. That's making me emotional right now. Yeah, I'm trying to be just a little bit better. Yeah. And hopefully my kid can be
it's real. Yeah, it's real.
Shout out to Van. Shout out to Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin for that great show.
Yeah, and Ryan Hunley, thanks for the reminder. I mean, I think you're saying that you're actually actively experiencing what we're talking about, which is 100%. Like, how do you, at minimum, whether you're intentionally or you're like trying to make it just a part of your family culture, being like, we get curious about each other. We're curious about like each other's emotions, each other's experiences. We don't have to be right. There's some things, of course, but like, I think that you're speaking to what I think both of us probably would have welcomed when we were little. And that's real for me too. Yeah, it's like, 100%. If I had, my core memory we were talking about earlier, when I often think about age 6 was we were in first grade, it was the water fountain. Crystal was in front of me and I was like, you're cute. Like I thought I was really flirting at 6, right? But and the teacher was like, excuse me, come to me in the principal's office. Oh, wow. My parents picked me up from school. I had to like go home. It was like this whole big thing. And I was like, but where was somebody being like, what did you mean? Right. What were you feeling?
And how do you as an adult make an assumption like that?
And again, you're like that early introduction of shame can really change and transform. Sure. And it sounds like you're interrogating that in yourself and you're like, actually, I'm not going to just be like, here's what's right and wrong. Let's like get curious about each other.
100%.
And at the end, that does break intergenerational trauma. Like for me and my family, it's the like, this culture of silence and and sometimes it's in really very problematic ways. And sometimes it's just in the like simple ways that you're like, just tell me that happened to you. I care about your experience.
For sure.
It's opened doors for me and my parents, like specifically my dad, like in the last couple of years, because I do think, I'm not afraid to just like ask the hard question. It sounds like you're in some of that boat too. Well, how did that make you feel? Like and he's like, well, I don't really know. I'm like, well, yeah, you do. Like, come on, let's do it. Like, without trying to therapize him. But it's also like, I do think it's been good for my siblings and hopefully my nieces and nephews are some really emotionally intelligent kids now too, because everybody's in that work.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you're speaking to how it's just real for you right now.
For sure.
Especially when you have a little one looking you in the face.
Yeah. That definitely, parenthood makes it much realer, I feel like.
What's his name?
Their name?
Their name? Van. Okay. Yeah. Love it.
Yeah, he's awesome. Well, I think it takes again, we started talking about community.
Yeah.
And I think it takes, for me, at least in my experience, understanding my own lived experience to make me and I understand it better because I've been in community with other people who are sharing their lived experiences. Yeah. It's through the context of other people's differing lived experience that I have a better idea of my own.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what you do in your everyday work. Like you talk about convening people, you're giving them the opportunity to maybe find themselves and find themselves in spaces with similar lived experiences so they can get a better reflection on themselves.
Yeah.
We've talked. This has been an awesome conversation. I want to talk a little bit about your work at 45.
Sure.
So let's get into it a little bit.
Can I stop you just real quick? I think one thing that I don't want to get lost in this is that as we're kind of pivoting to today is how formative the work of Indy Pride really was for me. I went away.
Yeah.
I went to grad school for a couple of years in Denver, lived in Chicago because partly the short story of the longer one is woke up in November 2016 after the election in Denver, was we were all just crying in our oat milk lattes. And I was wait a minute, where am I in this bubble? What's happening? I love the Midwest. I love why are we all so shocked and surprised that Trump won? And by January of 2017, I was living back here in the Midwest because I was I have the safety and the privilege to be able to go back into that. What now feels a lot like a war zone. Anyway, so I say all that to say that my need when I moved back to Indy, it was probably 2020. So coming out of COVID, kind of coming out of the summer of 2020, the really violent summer, especially here, the murder of J. Reed, there was to me, I was I actually can't just wait for community to kind of come to me. And I think what we're both speaking to is how do you know yourself enough to not necessarily have the confidence to go seek the community, but to at least to know where you test the waters and what are you learning and how do you get curious about people and other people. And that was true. That's probably how I found my way to Indy Pride. And then I think fast forward a few years, I just, especially right now, want to shout out the need for that kind of safe, inclusive space for queer folks, especially in the state and in the city. And everything we're saying, I think is real to each of us individually. And I also just think there's a really broad community that's really scared right now. And so
100%.
how do we, not just queer folks, right? But anybody of color, of any status, of any and how are we, I feel a responsibility, especially with the platforms and the spaces we have to convene people, that there's a level of safety responsibility that we have. Yeah. And I mean that psychologically and emotionally, which we've been talking about a lot too, but also physical. And so I just think the ways in which people can continue to create that, even if it's as small as, making sure you have a Pride sticker on your door, wherever you're at, or, hey, I want to talk about it and ask what your pronouns are. Anything really matters. And so I just think this, especially as we kind of walk into this, what does today look like for me? My hope is that the legacy continues that hey, there's still some intentional thought of who and how and what does it mean to move safely and who's actually not welcome. If we're going to be real, especially from a white person, actually being anti-racist means I'm going to say no sometimes to things. And that's really hard for white folks to do. And especially right now, I think it's we want everybody to be happy and you want to kind of be copacetic. And it's it's bullshit.
Because they're centering not their room for everybody. We center our own comfort at the detriment to other people. Yeah.
So I guess what I think about, and especially as we kind of make a segue, is community is intentional. And community is not for everyone right now. In my community anyway. It's there's just some that's just not.
Well, that's
just not acceptable. We're not going to. We're not going to. Doesn't matter.
100%. I appreciate that extra context because I was going to ask about Indy Pride.
Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead of you.
No, but I think I appreciate it because I was going to ask you what you have taken from there that you're tapping into as you build community through 45 that you didn't expect to have to pull from that work.
Yeah, I mean, this work, I think Indy Pride was really good. I learned a lot about diversity of thought within what sometimes, we kind of talked about this earlier, about what sometimes can be lumped or generalized as one monolith of people. And what I learned is not only just that there's just this wildly expansive world of both sexuality and gender and all the things in between. I learned so much about that, but I also learned like the littlest things matter, right? Like it matters to have gender neutral bathrooms. It matters to know. So the like, especially in event planning and especially in like big group convening, like a small detail may not be small and you're like, we just got to hurry because doors are in 30 minutes. No, where's the sign for the gender neutral bath? Like those little things, I think those are tangible things that I think I really took away, that like, you just ask yourself the question of like, who are we not considering right now? And how do you kind of consider them? That was really important to me. And then I would also just say like, how do you listen to people in a way that, this especially right now, like everybody kind of, it's a huge group. When you have Indy Pride, which has kind of the spotlight as one of the only and maybe the biggest like LGBTQ organization, it's the one that catches the most heat.
Right.
And how do you take that heat as both in stride, I think, with humility, but also as consideration and feedback, as opposed to again being like, well, we already tried that and it didn't work. Like trying to be that defensiveness. I actually think where I've found success, and I hope that people feel that at 45, is that like a style of leadership that is actually more like kind and like centering like care and community care, as opposed to just like there's a right and a wrong and a black and a white and here's what it is and we're doing it this way, can actually go a really long way. And at the end of the day, like leaves doors open that otherwise people would have closed. That is true for Indy Pride. I think historically, like, I was the first female board president. Historically was like kind of run by white men, cis men specifically. And it felt really important to kind of broaden that table and that group and those voices. And I think what that did is then allowed lots more opinions.
For sure.
But that was the point, right? Isn't that the point, right? And at least for those of us who want to live in liberation and like want to be living in joyful, like inclusive worlds. And so that was, I think I hope I take that like style of listening and care and leadership of people's opinion, like into this next phase and whatever kind of continues to happen with 45. But yeah, it's hard because I think especially when you have your own shit, which we've already dug into, you want to be like, no, you just don't know. You don't know how hard it is to do that. Or you don't know how, or especially for me as a white woman, like how am I listening to the experiences of people? I mean, for us, police at Pride was a big deal. It was a big conversation whenever I kind of took over. And how are we just listening and being mindful of like safety looks different to different people. And of course I knew academically and theoretically, I have tons of friends, of color who experience even that violence against them. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you just know it and you're done and move on. And so I all that to say, I think that my hope is that I took a lot of, really good relationships, really good, like tangible takeaways of how do we make space. And the intangible pieces that I feel really proud of that I hope I continue and I just want to keep sharpening is the ways in which we're just, listening to each other in a way that is not starting to force the othering, because that's what everybody else wants to do, right? Like that's what especially right now, everybody wants to say who's right and who's wrong and sort them out and let's figure out how do we keep moving. And that's not how we find like liberation together, right?
For sure. So, well, we like to use the word listening. We like to say we're listening, but really we are just doing without any thought, without any intention. How difficult is it has it been difficult to incorporate the tangible things, the little things into the work of like what you're doing with 45? Because that's like venue specific. Like we bring these things to the venues. Has that been a tough thing to incorporate? And I would be curious if anybody would answer that differently, like what that would mean. Because I guess what I think about is like, it's kind of easy, y'all. Like we did, 45, I'm on the IU Health Foundation board, and we also, 45 helped book the talent for Rev this year at the Speedway, and was in a committee meeting after we had booked all the talent. And, one of the things that I had shared with the giant group of committee members was that lineup was 65% self-identifying as queer, and more than 50% people of color, like at lead. And everybody like clapped. And I was like, guys, like I booked that myself. Like, I have a talent team that does it, but like, not only does the city have great queer artists of color, but also you just do it. Like in my brain, I'm kind of like, where and what stops, folks from really kind of creating that space and the platforms for people? Because I believe, at least in the world that I live in and the ways that I have the power and the privilege that I do, that, we have the talent, we have the relationships, we have the people, and no, it doesn't feel like it's that hard to make sure there's a voice and a space and a place for those folks. For sure. Well, I guess the reason I asked is because of where we currently are geographically. And like, while I know of the communities that are like who rally around and stand in solidarity with each other and lift each other up. And then I know the small minority who unfortunately find themselves in positions of power to influence, I think, and to intimidate folks like somebody like yourself who would be trying to incorporate even the smallest like meaningful change. Like is something that I would be, or at least from an outside perspective, feel like, okay, I would expect pushback. But I like to hear that it's not, that you really haven't. At least, I mean, not
outwardly.
Yeah.
And let me be clear. I think I certainly have, there are still the systemic things. I think the thing that I often think about is, at least I try to move around the world. Like I'm not going to change systemic racism, let's just say, in my lifetime. That's just not going to happen. So what if we actually just examine, like, if I'm at this table, how do I, like, if you have to kind of, this might be a little crass, but like play the game, but not become the character. And that's what I think about often, especially in people with positions of power leadership, is it's really easy to be like, my proximity to power or my power can start to make me question or think or listen to that influence, when really it's like, actually, what are you doing with the quite little microphone in some places, right? I mean, I think I want to also acknowledge that, like, I have an immense amount of privilege that allows me to be like, hey, no, we're going to go this direction. And that I have, some people would probably say like an unhealthy level of fearlessness, but like that's sometimes I think what's a bit required. And so, I don't know. I mean, I think some of what you're saying, I experience, especially as you're building something new sometimes, because you're introducing something new to people that you have to kind of let them, what is 45? And also, what do you mean you guys are doing, we're doing the Indy Pride Festival this weekend, right? Like, or what do you mean you guys, like, don't you guys just own a couple of venues? Like, and there's some of that kind of detangling that's really hard and sometimes can bring up some interesting conversations. But really, I hope, and I would love to continue conversation with leaders who are feeling that kind of resistance. There's a benefit to having, we're locally owned, the owners of 45 are good friends that are really progressive, meaningful, influential guys in the city that allows me to move in those ways. So I know it's not true for everybody, but I mean, especially in the arts and culture space is we have the talent in the city. We have and if I have the stage, then why would we not kind of quite literal stage? Then why would we not make that available to folks and the talent that we have in the city? So.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think you hit the nail on the head with that. One, everything that we were talking about, like you understand who you are. So it allows you to navigate those spaces a little bit easier, because like you're not necessarily, you can couch the internal conflict and in order to better operate in that space. And two, you can acknowledge I have privilege that allows me to move in ways that other people might not. And I think the issue at an executive level is that folks tend to not recognize the privilege that they have, and then they just sit at the table. They don't do anything with that privilege. And I think the question is, how do I utilize the privileges that I have? And that requires me to know who I am. And then where, like, the communities and stuff that I come from, and then how can I use that to better leverage opportunities for people that don't have the same privilege. And I mean, again, like we're not talking about massive global corporations in the world that I live in, right? So there is different levels and layers of dynamics. I think, and I know you are in this community in the city as well, where you just start to see like really cool people doing really cool shit. And it's like, let's stop talking about just this small group over here. And like, let's stop talking in this echo chamber and like giving the space and the kind of voice and again, the microphone to folks who are doing really cool shit and may not have the privilege to leave the city ever. So they're like, this is home. My family's here. Like, my cousin and nephew are going to graduate from high school. I can't leave right now, but I want to have a music career. Like, what does that mean and look like? It doesn't always, it's always a flashy, sexy kind of thing that we, everybody wants to kind of see on the cover of magazines. So that's also what I think in some ways, maybe like some of my social work days and organizing days kind of come back there is you're like, who's not at this table? Who are we not listening to right now? And who's doing really cool stuff? And what does it mean to kind of bring them or invite them into spaces that we're in? So, for sure. Again, it's not about shedding the pieces. It's about embracing all the pieces of ourselves.
That's right.
All right. So we're about coming up on an hour. So it was longer than I even thought that we were going to be. We talked very little about 45.
Let's do it.
So I want to know, there's one thing I really wanted to touch on before we kind of wrap up here, which is you were just on This is North Indy Pod.
Yes.
And you mentioned you you are interested or invested in like scalable venues. What does that mean in bringing that here? I was wondering if you could go into that just a little bit more. I feel like you skimmed the surface of it in the other one. I just wanted to hear kind of what that means, just at a general sense, and then why it's important for somewhere like Indy to have venues of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Concept.
Yeah, so you're kind of talking about this on two levels, which is exactly right. Like one is the very micro level, like for us at 45, the like necessity and the strategic business decision of carefully adding venues of different sizes matters. Like that's how you build a scale. I can touch on that. And I think I also just like, you're right. Like there's this macro level of us as a city, if we have that, or what it looks like for bigger entities, to have multiple venues to go, continue to build that kind of business. And what does it mean? Kind of what does it change for the ecosystem? That's both real and relevant for the city and for 45. So what I mean is, I talk about this a lot because it's just so core to the work we do, which is, your favorite artist didn't start at Ruhoff. It didn't start at Gamebridge. It didn't start at Lucas Oil, right? They were playing on teeny tiny stages and backyard festivals and, all that kind of stuff. And so while you do have big, major kind of music, live entertainment companies doing and having those small kind of stages, they also have thousands and thousands of stages, right? So it's going to feel and look, hopefully there's some nuance to like what the experience feel like for those big groups, but they're doing the same thing. We are just on a, times that by 1,000, right? Yeah. But what we're doing is then you say, okay, well, if I have an artist who's just going to sell 100 tickets right now, but, we've built this agent base of agencies around the country that, has represent tons of artists. Well, here's this one they want us to try at 100 tickets. Okay, great. So you sell out at 100 tickets, then you move to 400 tickets. Well, where am I going to put them for 400 tickets? They sell that out, then I go there. Right. So when these guys bought the Vogue in 2019, they just bought the Vogue as a singular entity. It's always only run as a singular entity. And so it meant oftentimes that they would have kind of either, their own booking team or you would invite others to book because you really needed who was selling out what is now our turntable size room, right? To be able to sell the Vogue is 950. And then where do you go once they sell at 950? We want to keep them with us. And I think for me and for 45, we want to keep artists with us for their, the length of their hopefully long careers.
Sure.
Because we want them to have the same experience. And a lot of artists and agents don't want to go to the big corporations, right? They want to go to locally owned companies. So what we're doing is saying, okay, we were right there in the middle. So we had just 950 and it was working. It has worked for literally decades. The Vogue is iconic as it is. But we said, if this is going to really work, like we got to go down. And so folks may remember Crackers Comedy Club. That's right next door. My background, we touched on it briefly, is in community development. So kind of adaptive reuses of abandoned spaces. How are we reimagining them? So when I walked in there, I was like, oh my God, why are we not using this?
For sure.
And that was a real kind of passion DIY project for kind of a small group of us on our internal team, but so fun. And we made that into now what is our 200 to kind of 400 cap room. And so we have everybody from, just last night we had a board meeting for a nonprofit in the city because the space allows us flexibility.
Nice.
But we also, this weekend we'll sell, 300 or 400 tickets and sell out a show of a touring band, right, that's coming through. So the idea is that so then they can sell that out. Then they're going to go to the Vogue next year. We'll book them again in a year and they'll go to the Vogue. And then once they sell at the Vogue, we'll go to Rock the Ruins. And once they go to Rock the Ruins, we'll hopefully go to Broadway Park or American Legion Hall. So the scalable venues really does matter for the pipeline of artists and how you kind of keep them here in the city. Why that matters to the city is if you only have one group doing that, you have limited stages and there's endless artists. So then you're only really going to get who are those, let's call it like the big corporate artists that come through. We have the privilege, and while it's not as many as many other cities, one of our friendly, close friends and competitors, right, in MOKB in Fountain Square, they have the same thing. You go lo-fi, you go hi-fi, you go hi-fi annex, then they go up to Fisher's. Well, we're doing the same thing. And so then that's just double kind of the venues for the big tours that come through. And so, I think that matters in the city because we don't want artists to skip. Everybody's got to get to Chicago, right? Everybody books a date in Chicago. Those venues are endless. For sure. So if you want to stop in the Midwest, if you don't have a venue here, or a stage here in Indianapolis, you're going to go to Cincinnati, you're going to go to Louisville, you're going to go to maybe in St. Louis, right? Because, there's kind of radius clauses and ways that is. Indy makes sense. It's 2.5 hours, it's here, and it's on a major thoroughfare. People want to be playing here. And we're not going to keep getting that kind of volume and pipeline of artists if we don't have the venues and the stages to host them.
For sure.
And so, I think for us, it matters very, very acutely at the business level. It makes money. It makes us, money because it says, hey, we can do for every 4 okay shows at Turntable, 1 Vogue show will make that all make sense, right? It gets us back to a break even from an economic standpoint. So it allows us to be really flexible, allows board meetings to happen. It allows local artists to have. We have lots of great local DJs that have come through. And so I think Turntable for us has been a fun experiment and has worked really well as from our own business. And then, I think the traction and the attention it's getting, people are receiving it really well. It's a really cool space, allows then those bigger venues and kind of the ways in which we're growing up to continue to evolve and to move. And again, we'll do now, last year the Vogue did 160 shows. This year we'll do about 340 just indoors.
Damn.
So you just doubled the amount of shows that the city gets access to and artists that hopefully people get to see for the first time or their favorite artists. And having that portfolio of venues really does matter from a business perspective. But again, it allows the city to kind of stay on the radar of agents and tours that need to get to these bigger places and bigger cities. So.
Well, I appreciate you breaking that down. And what I really love about it is the pipeline aspect for local artists, because I think that's the thing is I see a lot of investment for the big acts and the one-off moments. But I would love to see more of that, investment in our local people. Because that's why people will come back, not just for the one big moment, but let's get them to vacation here.
Exactly.
We got cool shit going on sometimes. So
that's real. I don't know where I was just recently saying this, but somebody had asked sometimes you just throw a local artist on for a show that's not doing well to add some extra tickets. And I reframed it, which is the way our approach is. And I want to say it here, which is that actually we actually put local artists on shows that are doing really well too. Right. I mean, we just had shout out Alice and Victoria. We just had Alice and Victoria open for Marsha Ambrosius at the Vogue on Monday night. It was a short set, but we were like, this show's doing really well. Match up wonderfully. It was genre. She's a beautiful singer. Marsha Ambrosius called her out from the stage 3 or 4 times. It was just this top tier experience that I was like, this is what we're trying to do. And at the end of the day, how does it not just an add-on or a forgotten comedy, but being how are we using this stage, this platform with the power that we have to kind of say hey, let's connect the dots in a way that ultimately I hope kind of empowers folks in the city to continue to grow and build. So
I love that because again, that's a very specific example of how can I use the privilege that we've created here to help a person, fulfill potentially a dream, Oh,
and she's been hustling in the city forever. Not that that's going to be life-changing because she's a star on her own, but
for sure.
There is still the validation that I know creatives still need and their work as they're continuing to hustle and grind. So
100%. Well, I've really appreciated this conversation. I've got a few more questions as we wrap it up here. We have a recurring segment on the show called Give Them Their Flowers. We've been talking about community a lot, and I feel like this is a perfect time to reach out and ask you, Jenny, who do you think right now deserves their flowers, and who do you want to shout out and give to today? Yeah,
it's a great question. We talked about partnership and community. One of our biggest partners that will continue to be really important to 45 is Indy Parks. And so, I actually gave her a shout out last week in another conversation and feels really important today because today's her last day.
Okay.
Phyllis Boyd is the director of Indy Parks, has worked for the city for years, has changed the ways in which public space is being used, raised more money than ever before, started all these projects. Today's her last day, and she's just been a force. And I learn something every time we're in really hard conversations with community. And also when we're brainstorming and dreaming up new ideas, she's just a real, she's somebody that people in the city need to know and pay attention to. She's an artist as well. And has had her shows at Harrison Center, all kinds of cool shit. So Phyllis Boyd, I don't know if you'll ever hear this, but you are loved. And I think she's completely transformed the city in a way that is both powerful and gracious. And again, that's the thing I strive for. And I think people, they have a meaningful, experience when they've had anything that Phyllis Boyd has touched. And quite frankly, Phyllis Boyd has touched a lot of things in the city, whether people know it or not.
All right. Shout out to Phyllis Boyd. I'm going to have to do some research. 100%. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And shout out to Madeline McKinnon and Frida's Flowers for sponsoring that segment too. Okay. You got a lot coming up this summer. You just said 3,000 shows at the Vogue this year.
300.
30,000 shows at the Vogue this year.
My team's like, what?
As we wrap it up, can you tell us what specifically people need to be aware of, what they need to know about, and how do they go out and get that information?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a very busy and active indoor season now, of course, across multiple venues. So that's really excited. So you can find every show for all of our venues on 45.com. And so that has indoor and outdoor. But this summer, to your point, we are really excited about, again, this partnership with Indy Parks. So we have Rock the Ruins coming back at Holiday Park this season. This year, we're going to do 7 ticketed events. And then we're doing one with the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra.
Nice.
So we'll do a free community show there. Symphony in the Park. It'll be beautiful. Should be a lot of people, but all of that at Rock the Ruins at Holiday Park is on 45's website. We're really excited about this new series we're bringing to Broad Ripple Park. And so we'll do 3 shows, kind of pilot 3 shows this summer, Deer Tick and Drive-By Truckers, and then Semisonic and Toad and the Wet Sprockets. So, nice. A bit of mixed genre, but I think that'll work well in Broad Ripple. I'm really excited about July 20th. We're having Shaky Graves at Broad Ripple Park. And so that'll be a really good show. And if, kind of going backwards, those are the shows that otherwise would go, to Everwise or some other kind of outdoor venue like that we want to kind of create the space that will sell a little bit more than Holiday Park. So Broad Ripple Park is going to be really exciting. I think that the highlight or spotlight I want folks to know too about that is in the master plan for Broad Ripple Park, there is kind of an outdoor venue, permanent outdoor venue that is built there. And so what we're doing is piloting a few shows this summer to kind of work out the logistics, get community feedback, and ultimately, if there's a conversation to be had about a permanent outdoor music venue at Broad Ripple Park on the river, we would like to be in that. And so there's a lot of things happening, and we want people to go buy tickets, see what it feels like. We're asking folks to bike, ride, or walk. We're partnering with Indigo. We'll have additional route coming through, drops you off right at the park. Go to the village. All these local businesses that have just hustled and grinded and made the Broad Ripple Village what it is. Come back, come there, get a drink before and after, and hopefully that sparks some good stuff for the neighborhood, and ultimately brings good music back to Broad Ripple, which is our goal.
I'm excited for it.
Yes.
We've been going to Broad Ripple Park a lot lately because we play pickleball over there on the courts.
Yes, you do.
So it's right next to our son's daycare, so we just go and pick them up.
It's a beautiful park.
It's a great park. I had not really been there that much until this year, and I'm like, this is
and
a pretty
cool
nice
history.
place.
Like if you, the athletic field, the multi-purpose field, which is where we'll do, we'll set up all our staging, used to be an amusement park and Olympic sized pool was there.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just the coolest shit that you're you just dig a little deeper, and there's a history there that we want to honor, but we also want to keep making public space, fun and flexible and innovative in the ways we can. So
100%. Well, I think you're doing that, and you are making an outsized impact on the city. So I'm excited to continue following along. Yeah. Thanks for making me cry. I appreciate it. I love to tap into my emotions. So thank you for that.
I'm really glad you did. Yeah.
But Jenny, I really appreciate it. We're going to have more conversations after this. For sure.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. For everybody else, new episodes of this show, Tuesdays just kidding. New episodes of this show come out on Tuesdays at some point. There's some announcements coming out, so stay tuned for that. But for everything that related, YouTube and wherever you get your podcast for the show, conversationpeacepod.com for everything else, merch, The Open Door, whatever else you might be looking for. And like I said, we got some announcements coming up, so stay tuned for that. You're going to want to know, especially if you've been tapping into the show. But until then, shout out to Lydia and Pattern for hosting us in the space. Shout out to Popular Rapture, John Overton on the mics. Shout out to David Durham Visuals on the cameras this time. Shout out to Madeline McKinnon and Frida's Flowers for the flowers. Shout out to the Studs again for the space as well. Shout out to Jenny Boyts 45 for being an amazing guest.
Thank you.
Shout out to me.
To you.
On this show.
You did a great job.
I have been Patrick Armstrong, and this is Conversation Piece. We'll see you all soon.